A pleasure to be welcoming Rabbi JJ Schacter for the second time, unfortunately not in person, but it's my pleasure to welcome him for his annual memorial shir in honor of his father, Rabbi Herschel Schacter. This year's topic, When You See Something, Do Something, Reflections on Pesach, in memory of his father. Rabbi Schacter needs no introduction, university professor of Jewish history and Jewish thought and senior scholar at the Center for the Jewish Future at Yeshiva University, and a good friend of Rinat. And we're privileged to have you here with us tonight.
Hi, Ruth, you froze before. You're back?
Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't hear the last part of the sentence, but that's okay.
Okay. I just say we welcome you back.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, all of you. My name is not David Cooper, so I'm explaining to you why I appear as David Cooper. I am sitting in the home of David and Tova Cooper in Memphis, Tennessee. I came here earlier today to participate in a family simcha, and I've been very blessed by having the opportunity to be with them and to use David's laptop. So I want to thank them very much for their hospitality. I want to thank Ruth for being with me all the way through. This is not the first time. This is more than once. And in particular, to thank Mishpachat Hartstein for sponsoring my talk this evening. And I'm extremely grateful to you. And we should share smachot, please God, for a long, long time. I want to thank Faye Landis and the heads and members of the Adult Ed Committee at Rinat for everything that they do, and want to begin Bershus, our Marda Asra, Rabbi Strachler, whose presence honors me and all of us this evening. And I also see Rabbi Wiener, who joins us, and very touched and grateful for both of you to be here in memory of my father, Zichrono Livracha, Rav Tzvi ben Reb Pinchas and Miriam. I want to thank my daughter Leah, Dr. Leah Knapp, for providing the title for the talk this evening. I had a conversation with her a while ago, and I wasn't sure. I did want to speak about something. I wasn't sure what the theme would be, and one thing led to another, and she suggested this title, and so I'm grateful to her. I think that reflecting on my father's passing and on my father's life, I think it's clear that this mantra was something that was very central to him. He was an activist for his entire life. He did a lot. He never sat on the sideline, but he threw himself in and did what needed to be done. What needed to be done when he was younger was to be a leader at Yeshiva College and Yeshiva University and Yeshivas Rebbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, primarily and most significantly. When you see something, you do something. He saw that America was going to war, and he saw what was going on to his family members and other Jews in Europe. Obviously had no idea of the extent, but he knew about it. And I shared with you in the past this extraordinary letter that he wrote to his parents, explaining why he wanted to volunteer to be a chaplain in the army, in spite of the fact that they were absolutely and unalterably opposed to that. He was the youngest of their 10 children, and he already had a job as a rabbi in Stamford, Connecticut. And his father and mother did not want him to be put in harm's way and to endanger himself. And God knows what would happen to him overseas. but he insisted on going because if you see something, you have to do something. And that's what he did his entire life, whether it was a Hungarian Jewry, a Soviet Jewry, or Israel, or the Bronx. He was someone who acted in very decisive ways and made a big difference. And that had an impact on me and on my sister and on our entire families, to try to not stand by, but to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. And so this is the theme. And what I would like to do in the time that we have is to share with you, I want to share a number of examples of this idea from the events leading up to and culminating in Yetzias Mitzrayim, and then begin to step back a little bit and focus on it in a larger way. So I'm going to start with the very beginning of Sefer Shmos. Please make sure that you do have access to the handout. As you know, I don't speak to you, but I learn together with you. And I would love for you to somehow have access. Thank you, Ruth, for putting this onto the chat, and have access to my sheets. I also do want to apologize. My initial expectation was that this would be a live presentation in Rinat, in our shul, together with Zoom. But because Baruch Hashem, I have a family simcha, so I left Teaneck today, and it is only on Zoom. Any of you who went to shul looking for me, I apologize, and hopefully you'll get back in time to be able to catch this on Zoom. So the Torah tells us, so Paro wanted to destroy the Jewish people. He tells the midwives that they have to act in a way that will ensure the destruction of the Jewish people, but they refused to listen to what it is that Paro mandated. Translation is they kept alive. They gave chiyus, they gave life to the children. Instead of killing them, the opposite, they gave them life. And Rashi points out here, and this is my first example, if you see something, you do something. What does it mean they gave them life? It's not just that there was an absence, so they didn't destroy them. They gave them life by not destroying them. But Vatachayena Sayolodim, says Rashi, Bisafkos Lahem Mayim Umazo. Not just they didn't hurt them or they didn't kill them, but they actually sustained them. They provided Mayim and Mazon. They provided water and sustenance for them. They actually proactively sustained them, nourished them, fed them. They did something. It wasn't just the absence of not doing anything negative, but it was actually very, very positive. It's based on a Gemara in Soto, Yod Aleph Amud Beis, below on the first page. Lo dayan, it wasn't enough. Shalo himisu oson, it's not enough only that they didn't kill these babies. Ella shahayu maspikos lahem mayim umazon. They actually proactively did something in order to help them. The top of page 2, there's a Medrash here that really gives us a much stronger sense, a much more powerful sense about how far these midwives went. Says the Medrash, Vatachayena Sayalodim, top of page 2. V'chimei achar shalo asu ka'asher dibra alehem, ein anu yodim shekimu es hayalodim. If it's v'lo asu ka'asher dibra alehem melech Mitzrayim, if they didn't do what the king of Egypt wanted, then obviously it's Vatachayena Sayalodim. Obviously, they let them live. If they didn't do the opposite of letting them live, then obviously they allowed them to live. Lama hutzra chakosav lomer Vatachayena Sayalodim. So the Medrash points out that obviously it's more than just the absence of the destruction, because that's obvious, that's assumed. The Torah already says that they didn't do what the king of Mitzrayim wanted them to do. So the Medrash continues, and the Medrash really plays this up and lays this out and gives a number of interesting examples. V'yesh kilos b'soch kilos. This is a praise on top of a praise. Lo dayan, it's not enough, shelo kimu es devorov, that they didn't listen to what the king of Egypt wanted. Elaod hosifu lasos imoim tovos, but they actually proactively did all kinds of wonderful things. Yesh mehen, for example, yesh mehen shahayu anios, v'holchos hamiyaldos umagbos maimu mozon miboteim shelashiros ubos v'nosnos la'anios. There were, in some cases, the mothers of these little babies were poor, and they did not have the wherewithal to be able to sustain these babies after they were born. So the Mialdos went, and they collected all kinds of sustenance, water and food from the wealthy households, and they gave it to these poor mothers. Vehein machayos es b'neihem, and they were the ones then who had the ability and the capacity to allow their children to live. That's what the pasuk means. They allowed these children to live. Another explanation, yesh mohen, there were those babies, sheru'uyin lotzes, chigrim, o sumim, o bale mumim, o lachtoch bo ever sheyetze yafeh. There was a possibility that there were babies who were going to be born with all kinds of disabilities, this disability or that disability. Umahayu also. So what did the midwives do when they realized that this might be a challenge? Omdos bitfila v'omros la'kadosh baruch hu, they would pray in the presence of God, and they said, Atayo dea shelo kiyamnu dvarav shel paro, you know, God, that we did not fulfill what Paro wanted. Divarecha she'anu mevakshos l'kayim, it is your words that we want to fulfill, not the words of Paro. Ribon ha'olam, and therefore they pray, Yetze havlad l'shalom, that the child should emerge whole and hearty and wholesome and healthy and complete. Shelo yimtzu Yisrael yedeim lahasiach aleinu lomar hareyatzu bale mumin shebikshu laharogosam. This way, we are afraid that people are going to think that we actually did want to listen to what Paro commanded, and we did want to fulfill his wish, and so we ended up maiming these children. Nobody should think that. So in order for that to be avoided, we're asking you, God, that you should help us, and you should help these children. So this is amazing. If you see something, you do something. If you see that there's a danger that these children may come out, these babies may be born with all kinds of challenges, so you do something about it and you try to rectify the situation. Amar Rab Levi, Hare Amarta es hakala emor es hachamura. You're only talking about minor challenges that they may have had, but talk about the more important challenges. Yesh mehen, not that they perhaps were poor, and not perhaps that they were going to be challenged, but actually he goes so far as to say there were those sheru'uyin lomos b'shas yitziasa, o iman l'sakem bam v'lomos acher yitziasa, that they were actually in real danger, in danger for their lives. Not just that they were in danger that they would have this challenge or that challenge, but they were in danger of dying in childbirth, either the baby or the mother. And there was a sakana, omdos betfila, and these women would stand up and pray, va'omros la'kadosh baruch hu, Rabbonu shalom, talei lahem achshav, suspend their fate now and allow them to live, so that nobody should say that we, God forbid, were complicit in trying to destroy them. So the pasuk says, "Vatachayena es hayeladim." So the es means and, together with. Vatachayena is the mother, and together with the yeladim are the babies. So here's example number one. When you see something, you do something. They didn't just not listen. They weren't passive-aggressive and not listen to what it was that Paro wanted, but they knocked themselves out. They extended themselves. and they wanted to do something to make a difference. And I think that's really the takeaway from my presentation this evening in memory of my father is to inspire us and to invite us to not sit back. You could fill in the blank, what it is that you think needs action, what it is that upsets you, what is it that you feel needs to be rectified, but to do something about it and not to just sit back. Second example, Miriam, the sister of Moshe. So Moshe is put out to float on the Nile. After some point, his parents couldn't keep him at home. So he's discovered by the daughter of Paro. And the daughter of Paro recognizes that he's a Jewish baby, and Miriam is hovering nearby. Vatomer achoso el bas Paro, ha'elech v'korasi lach isha meinekes min ha'ivrios. You know, if I see you're interested in trying to do something with this baby, I'm going to do something, and I'm going to bring a nurse woman from the Hebrews, and the Tomer lo bas Paro, go. And then what happens? How does the Torah describe the action, do something on the part of Miriam? Vatelech ha'alma. Vatelech ha'alma. Alma, translation here is young girl. Look at Rashi. Vatelech ha'alma. Holcha bizrizus va'alamos. She went with agility. She went with vigor. It's not just a description that she was a young girl, but she acted as a young person acts, with koyach, with determination. Bizrizus va'alamos, and it's quoted in a Gomorrah in Sota at the bottom of page 2. Amar Rabbi Lazar vatelech ha'alma melamed shaholcha bizrizus ke'alma. Look at Rashi, 4 lines from the bottom, 4 lines from the bottom. Shaholcha bizrizus ke'alma shekol kocha aleha. So if you see something and you do something, you don't just drag yourself, but you do something with great strength. I was looking at Mefarshim and commentaries on this Gomorrah, and I found the Benjoyada, the top of page 3. I would say in the last maybe 2 years, I've become enamored with this particular commentary. For the entire years of my life, until 3 years ago, I wasn't exposed to this sefer. I didn't learn this sefer. But recently, I don't know what it was that brought me, but I find his commentary to be thoughtful and introspective and astute. The Benjoyada is Rabbi Yosef Chaim Baghdad. He's known probably more famously as the Ben Ish Chai, a very, very famous Sephardi commentator on the Torah, and here commentator on many Mesachtes on Shas, who lived in Baghdad, very prominent Sephardi scholar. He's quoted all the time by Rav Ovadia Yosef. He's sort of the go-to posek and authority in the Sephardi world. And in his commentary, he says something interesting. The top of page 3. Sha'isa mahaleches, on this Gemara in Sota, Sha'isa mahaleches bizrizus. She went with alacrity. She went with strength, like a young girl. Kasha. V'chi haisa zekena v'alo hi be'emes. Alma ketana. She went like an alma. Well, obviously she went like an alma because she was an alma. The simple interpretation is that she was young. She went like a young person. Well, of course she went like a young person because she was a young person. The Gemara talks about the fact that she was not well. Chas lefi mizga ra'ui, im lefi mizga ra'ui shetelech ki isha zekena she'en la koach. Im lefi mizga, normally she would not be able to move so quickly because she acted like an elderly person that didn't have strength because she was challenged. Im kol zeh, but nevertheless, like we say in Yiddish, sie hat sich intergegartelt, she grabbed a hold of herself, ba'avor, because of her brother, nizdarza leile ka'alma ba'alas koach. So even though physically she was challenged, but she overcame her challenge, because if you see something that needs to be rectified, her brother is in danger, she wants to protect him, she does something, and she does something with koach. She overcomes her physical disability, and she does what it is that she feels that she has to do. Third example, now Moshe Rabbeinu is older. Moshe is older, and he's raised in the household of Paro, and then he walks out, and the Vayetze Alecha Vayar B'Sivlosa. Towards the top of page 3. This is the third example. The first example is the Mialdos. The second example is Miriam. When you see something, you do something. The third example is Moshe. Vayetze Alecha Vayar B'Sivlosam. Look at Rashi. Vayar B'Sivlosam. And he saw their burden. He saw their burden. Nosan Eina Valibo, says Rashi, Lios Meitzer Aleim. It's not just he saw. It's not just he beheld. It's not just he noticed. But he focused his eyes and his heart, and he became distressed by what it was that he saw. Look at the Ramban, Vayetze Alechav, the Ramban right below it, in the next to the last wide line. Ki higidu lo asher hu Yehudi, was told that he was Jewish. V'haya chafetz lir'osam ba'avur shehem echav. He wanted to see them because he knew that they were his brothers. V'hinei nistakel b'sivlosam ve'amolam. And he examined. It's not a passive viewing. He examined. He threw himself into it, into their pain and their struggle and their suffering. V'lo yochal lispol, and he wasn't able to abide it. V'lochein harag hamitzri, and therefore he actually did something about it. We'll come to the harag hamitzri in a moment. But the vayar b'sivlosam already is, if you see something, then in fact you should do something. Look at the Medrash. Once again, we have a Medrash that develops this further. Vayar b'sivlosam, my vayar. Shahaya roeh b'sivlosam, Moshe Rabbeinu beheld their burdens. Uboche. It mattered to him. This isn't a passive visual experience. This is emotionally invested and connected. And he started to cry, Va'omer, Chavali aleichem, woe is to me for them. Mi'itein musi aleichem, would that I should die for them. She'en locha melacha kasha mi'meleches hatit. They're working so hard. To work with clay is so strenuous. So what did he do? Emphasis do. Vayanoseng seifov. He lent his shoulder. He took his shoulder and he got into the work together with them. If you see something, you do something. You don't just watch, but you're watched, and then you're motivated. After you watch, you're motivated to participate, to become a partner in their work. Rabbi Lezer ben Osher Rabbi Yosef Glili Omer, how did it express itself? Ra'o masi gadol al katan. He saw that a young person was given a huge burden, which obviously was very difficult. Umasui katan al gadol, and a gadol, an adult person, was given a little burden. So you'll say, what's the problem with that? It's so much easier. But the problem is that if you're given a little burden, that means you have to go back and forth 100 times in order to fulfill your quota. So that's also a huge problem. Umasui ish al isha, umasui isha al ish, umasui zokein al bocher, umasui bocher al zokein. He saw how this was really difficult for them. And he didn't just see it, he went to do something about it. He left his retinue behind. After all, he's this fancy aristocrat. And and he tries to work on helping them in their burden. And it looked like he was helping Paro because he was making it easier for them to do the work that they had to do. But really, he was making it easier for them to try to help them. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so God says, you put aside your work and you went to see and to participate in helping the Jews. v'nahakta b'hem minhag achim, and you acted to them like a brother. Ani meniach es ha'elyonim ve'es ha'tachtonim ve'adaber imach. So I am also going to leave all of my retinue, and I'm going to speak only to you. Pasuk says, Vayar Hashem ki sor liros, and God saw that he turned away to look. The simple pshat is it happened in the context of the snare of the burning bush, but that's not how the Medrash interprets it. Ra Kodesh Baruch Hu b'Moshe shesor me'asakov liros b'sivlosam. God saw that he removed himself from what he was doing, from his aristocratic demeanor and bearing and retinue, and he went to help them. Lefichach vayikra elav Elokim mitoch hasneh. If you see something, then you have to do something. And on the top right, the Medrash Lekach Tov establishes the parallel to the famous Mishnah in Avos, Al Tifrosh min hatzibur. Al Tifrosh min hatzibur means don't separate yourself from the community. Throw your lot, cast your lot into that of the community, and be involved with the community and participate in the community. If you see something, don't just see something, and don't just leave it at seeing. Don't just be passive, but actually go ahead and do something heroic and do something significant so that your behavior will merit HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying, you moved away from your comfort zone. I'm going to do also the same thing, and I'm going to put my finger on you, and you're going to be the one with whom I will have a direct relationship. The last example that I want to give is the rest of that pasuk, the last example from the beginning of Shmos, and it's remarkable when I got this idea in my mind and I started looking that there are so many examples, dafka, in the events leading up to and culminating in Pesach. Obviously understand that all of this is just leading the way to Pesach, whether it's the Mialdos and Mitzrayim, and whether it's Miriam trying to help create the Moshe and Shel Yisrael, to put Moshe in a proper ability to be able to ultimately help. And she went to Bizrizus and she overcame whatever challenges she had. In the case of Moshe Rabbeinu himself, Vayar b'sivlosam is not just Vayar b'sivlosam. Even Rashi, Nasan Eina Valibo, Leos Meitzer Aleim, it's not just Eina Valibo, but it's Ro'osav. He put his hands in and he put his shoulder in, the Medrash says, and it mattered to him very, very deeply. The last one is the rest of that pasuk, Vayarish Mitzri, Make Ish Ivri Me'echav. So what do you do when you see injustice? What do you do when he sees an Egyptian hitting a Jew? He kills the Egyptian. He acts in a way that kills the Egyptian. And Rashi says he looks here and he looks there, and he not that the simple interpretation is he looks in different directions to see if anybody's watching, but ra'a ma'asa lo babayis u'ma'asa lo basada, vayarki ein ish, he sees that nobody is ever going to come from him. So the Sifsei Chachamim on the top left of page 4 explains why Rashi says it. But the point is clear. And the point is, when you see something, you do something. Moshe Rabbeinu is the primary example, and he's the one who was then chosen by God to redeem Bnei Yisrael from Mitzrayim, and it is that we celebrate on Pesach. I want to now move to the next part of this presentation and share a vort that I heard from my father, Zachrono Livracha, many, many years ago, that resonates with me more and more, that is directly on point. And it talks about the dangers of silence, the dangers of sitting by idly when one confronts something inappropriate, and underscores the importance of if you see something, then you really need to do something. And there's a real emes to this, and I hope you will find it meaningful. So the Gemara says at the bottom of page 4, also relevant to Yetzias Mitzrayim. Amar Rab Chia bar Abba, Amar Rab Simoy. It's 5 lines from the bottom. Here it's Yud Aleph, Amid Aleph, also in Masachet Sota. The Gemara here, the few blad in Masachet Sota, is a rabbinic interpretation of these chapters at the beginning of Sefer Shmos. Amar Rab Chia bar Abba, Amar Rab Simoy. Shlosha hayu ba'oso etza. So Paro now realizes that the Jews are multiplying and he's getting nervous. And so what does he do? He calls a committee meeting and he wants to figure out what's he going to do to them. Obviously, it can't be that the Jews potentially are going to, they're going to overcome us. So we've got to do something. What should we do? So the Gemara here says remarkably that there were 3 people on this committee that Paro called to determine what to do with the Jewish people. Shlosha hayu ba'osa etza. Bilam, Eov, v'Yisro. Interesting set of characters. Bilam, we know all about these people from different contexts, but here Chazal put them into the room together with Paro. Bilam, Eov, v'Yisro. And each one of them had a different reaction. Says the Gemara, Bilam sheyoatz neherag. Bilam said, yeah, great, good idea. Good idea, you want to destroy the Jewish people, go for it. Yoatz means he suggested it. He gave he supportive of this plan. What happened to him? Neherag. He was punished, he was killed. Eov sheshosak, nidon biyisurin. Eov, who was quiet, what was his punishment? Punishments, pain, suffering. Yisro sheborach, Yisro said, I'm out of here, I can't agree with this. And he ran out, he left the room, he just ran away because he couldn't abide what was going to happen. So what was his reward? Zachu mibnei banav sheyashvu b'lishkas hagoses. He was zocha that his Einekloch had a leadership role in Torah in the Jewish community. So my father pointed out the following, and Dafka tonight, as I have Yortzeit for my father and giving a shir in his memory, I want to quote from him. So he asked the following question: what happened to Eov? Eov sheshasak nidon biyisurin. And my father said that there's a Medrash, and I had this Medrash, but I couldn't find it when I was putting together the handout for this class, so I apologize, but it's a bona fide Medrash. It's a real Medrash, not a made-up Medrash. The Medrash says that Eov his whole life did not understand why he suffered so much for his silence. Eov sheshosak nidon biyisurin. And you know very well, you know your Bible, that the Yisurim, the punishments and the sufferings of Eov are the paradigmatic example of the most powerful sufferings imaginable. Nebuch, what Eov had to go through. In the book of Eov, we have a book called Eov in Tanakh, and I don't even want to say all of the terrible things that happened to him. And he never understood, says the Medrash. I didn't do anything. I was just quiet. I understand Bilam Sheyatz Neherag, but I was just quiet. Okay, so I should get punished because I didn't speak up, but ad kedei kach, to such an extent? And the Medrash says that Eov was absolutely, totally overwhelmed with lack of clarity until he saw the death of Nadav and Avihu, the 2 sons of Aaron that we read a couple of weeks ago in the Torah. When he saw what happened to Nadav and Avihu, says the Medrash, then he understood what happened, why it was that he deserved the punishment that he got. What does this mean? Turn to page 5. The Gemara says in Maseches Sanhedrin and Daf Nun Beis. You may remember a couple of weeks ago, we read in the Torah about the death of Nadav and Avihu. And the Torah actually explains why Nadav and Avihu were killed, because they brought, the Torah says, an Eish Zara. They brought a strange fire, whatever that means. But what's striking is that Chazal, and it requires an explanation that is not 100% clear to me. Chazal give, and Mefarshim, commentaries, give all kinds of explanations of why did Nadav and Avihu, why what happened to them happened to them. And many of them have nothing to do with Eish Zora. For some reason, later rabbinic exegetes were not tethered to this as the rationale and the explanation, even though it's albeit presented explicitly in the biblical text. And they came up with all different kinds of explanations. Says the Gomorrah in Sanhedrin, Nun Beis Amud Aleph, bottom of page 5. I'm going to read it and translate. 4 lines from the bottom, where the underline begins. Ukvar hayu Moshe v'Aaron mahalchim baderech. So once Moshe and Aaron were walking, they were walking on the road. V'Nadav and Avihu mahalchen achareya. And Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, were walking after them, behind them. V'chol Yisrael acharei, and all the Jews were following after them. So there's a parade, there's a procession. Moshe and Aaron are walking, behind them are Nadav and Avihu, and behind them the rest of the Jewish people. Amar lo Nadav li Avihu, says the Gemara. Nadav at that point says to Avihu, Emosai yamusu shnei zekenim halolu, va'ani va'ator nanhiges ador. When are these 2 old guys going to die? Shnei zekenim halolu. Who are they talking about? They're talking about their father Aaron and their uncle Moshe in a quite a disrespectful manner. Mosai yamushu shnei zekenim halolu. When are these 2 altichkis going to already pass away? And you and I are going to take over. Like it's time for us to be the leaders. As long as they're around, obviously they're the leaders. But when are they going to already move on so you and I can take over? Hashem is very upset. Amar le'en HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hanireh mi koveres mi. That's how you talk? We're going to see who buries who. We're going to see who buries who. You're going to bury them, or are they going to bury you? So the Medrash, the Gomorrah here says that the sin of Nadav and Avihu was they were disrespectful to their father and their uncle. Mosai yamusu shnei zekenim halolu. It's very powerful. One of these 2 old guys going to drop off, and you and I are going to be the leaders. Says the Medrash, when Eov saw this, he understood what happened to him. And my father said, what's pshat in the Medrash? So he said to me, it's obvious. Amar le, says the Gemara, Nadav le'avihu. What did Avihu do? Who was killed? Nadav and Avihu. I understand why Nadav was killed, because Nadav is the one who said it. Amar le Nadav le'avihu. Avihu didn't say a word. Why was he punished? Oh, says Eov, now I understand. You witness something inappropriate and you don't say anything, you are culpable. Now I understand. After all, I didn't do anything. That's exactly the point. You didn't do anything. If you see something, you have to do something. Amar le Nadav la'avihu. Nadav is the one who should have been punished. Why was Avihu punished? He didn't say anything. Avihu shasak. Sorry, shtika is not an excuse. Shtika is not an option. Now, says Eov, now I understand what happened. And so we understand the necessity of doing. But I want to now go to page 7. But at the end of the day, our doing is not necessarily dispositive. At the end of the day, we're not the ones who make a change, and we're not the ones who can ensure that things are going to be different. And we're not the ones who can effect any kind of change without appreciating the power of God. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all about God. So we do whatever it is that we could do, but even if we do something, either we won't be successful, or if we are successful, we shouldn't think it's because we did it. That's why we were successful. Which brings me to the concept of Lael Shimurin on the night of Pesach. Lael Shimurin. So Pesach night is known as Lael Shimurin, the night of watching. Turn to page 7. This phrase actually appears twice in the context of Pesach. In Parshas Bo, Perek Yud.
They told Softy has to go home, so we gotta. Oops. Ooh, cool. Where do you want to put this?
Oh, I needed more.
No, yeah, this is enough. Come on, look.
What happened? We lost him. He's not here anymore.
He's not speaking because you're speaking. Could you mute yourself, please? So the pasuk at the top of page 7, the pasuk in Parshas Bo, uses this phrase twice. In Perek Yud Beis, pasuk Mem Beis, Lael Shimurim hu laHashem lahotzia me'eretz Mitzrayim, hu halaylo hazeh laHashem shimurim l'chol b'nei Yisrael. So think about this at the night of the Seder. It's known as Lael Shimurim. What does it mean, Lael Shimurim? It's a night of protection. A shomer is a guard, a watcher. So the Gomorrah says in Pesachim and in Rosh Hashanah, what is Lael Shimurim? Lael hameshumar uba min hamazikin. That somehow it's a night of protection. It's a night where the negative forces don't have power. So Lael Shimurin. And on page 8, there are a number of nafkaminas. There are a number of things that we do on the night of the Seder that reflected being a Lael Shimurin. So I'm giving you 2 of them here. And think about it when you come across this at the Seder night. So the first one in Siman Tov Pei Beis, at the top of the page, Tov Pei Aleph, at the end of Tov Pei Aleph, is there is a minhag not to say Kriya Shema Hamita on Pesach night. The Noagim, says the Ramah, top of page 8, in the Rashi print, V'noagin shelo likros al mitaso rak parsha Shema, below sha'ar dvarim shekorin b'sha'ar leilos. We don't say the full Lael Shimur, the full Kriya Shema Lamita that we normally say in order to be a protection for us. Ki Lael Shimurim hu min hamazikim, because it's a Lael Shimurim. We don't need the protection of Kriya Shema Lamita because God protects us. The other example, which is much more common and much more well known, is below. And here the Ramah says, in the second half of the Seder, V'yesh omrim sheyesh lomar shvo chamoscha. We say shvo chamoscha, and v'liftoach had Pesach. Right? Do you all have a custom, like our custom? I think everybody has a custom that we open up the door at that point in the Seder ritual. V'liftoach ha-Pesach k'dei liskor shehu Lael Shimurim. We're not afraid. We can open up the door and we're not worried because it's a night of protection. Ubeschos emunah zu, and in the merit of this faith, Yavo Moshiach v'yishpo chamoso al ha'akel. We say shvufo chamoscha, which is a very charif and sharp formulation of God should take vengeance on all of our enemies. And we open up the door as an expression of faith that we believe in God's protection. And in the schus of that faith, God should indeed shafach hamaso on all of the enemies of the Jewish people. So at the end of the day, we're in God's hands. But I want to point out something very, very profound. And that is that it's not so simple. It's not so simple because at the end of the day, we still recognize that it's not so pashut that it's going to be a Lael Shimurin understood this way. Look at the Magen Avram. The Magen Avram says at the end of Siman Tov Pei Aleph, on the top right, where the line is very narrow, Vehecha de shchicha hezeka lo samchino nanisa. You know what? I know it's a night of protection, but when it's dangerous, you don't depend on the fact that it's a night of protection. You got to take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself. Look at the Chok Yaakov at the bottom, all the way at the bottom, 3 lines from the bottom. And this is about opening the door. So the Chok Yaakov says in his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, Ve'ein noagin kein lohaniach Pesach posuach, ki shchicha hezeka diganove. Shchicha hezeka, it's dangerous. You open up the door, people are going to come barging in. So what do we have here? We have on the one hand, it's a Lael Shimurin, and we believe that God is watching. On the other hand, you have to have seichel. And at some point, if you see something, you have to do something. You can't just put yourself into God's hands. And I'll tell you something that was gripping for me, that really shook me. When I was a rabbi at the Jewish Center many years ago, I see some beloved friends who were with me in those years. I once talked about Lael Shimurin. And there was a very, very, very wonderful woman who was a member of our shul by the name of Rochelle Tenenbaum, who came over to me after I spoke. And she said to me, Rabbi Schacter, she said it very nicely. She said to me, Rabbi Schacter, I want you to know, I don't know what you mean when you say that Pesach is Lael Shimurin, that God protects. The Nazis came for my father when we were sitting at the Seder and took him away, and we never saw him again. And I was devastated. I had nothing to say to her. Here I am talking about Lael Shimurin and keep the door open. And we don't have to say Kriya Shema Lamita because we don't need protection because God protects. Some of you may remember that, I don't know how many years ago, not very many, but already many, there was a massacre in a hotel in Netanya on the first night of Pesach. A lot of Jews were killed. So I don't know really what Lael Shimurin means. But that's when I began to look further into it, and that's when I discovered the Magen Avram and the Chok Yaakov. Lael Shimurin may be Lael Shimurin, but when there's danger, there's danger. And Lael Shimurin is not going to protect you from the danger. If it's shchicha hezeka, don't be a fool and open the door. If it's shchicha hezeka, you better say Kriya Shema Lamita, all of it, because you got to take care of yourself also. And I think this is the needle that I want to thread in conclusion for tonight. And that is, of course, we're in God's hands. Of course, we're in God's hands. But we can't just be in God's hands and just say, you know what, God will take care of it. But we have to do something ourselves. And when the time calls for it, we need to step up and not be somech in somchen al hanes, or be somech on a Lael Shimurin. I think the Magen Avram here in the Chok Yaakov open up a lot for us to think about. And that is, yes, on the one hand, it is Lael Shimurin, but when it's dangerous, it's dangerous. And we have to do something. And I think that is the legacy of my father. On the one hand, recognizing the centrality of the Ribono Shel Olam in this world, and acknowledging that at the end of the day, God runs the world. But at the same time, not just leaving everything to God's hands, but when America is at war in 1942, and when Jews are being mercilessly destroyed, you have to roll up your sleeve and go ahead and do something. And when Jews are in trouble, you need to help them. And when the situation is such that requires us to act, we have to act. Knowing full well that at the end of the day, it's God who's going to be the one who will cause us, Emir Hashem, hopefully to be successful. So this is the tension, and this is the balance. And sometimes it's more over here, and sometimes it's more over there. And this is something that I'm thinking about particularly this year, to figure out a way how to hold in two hands the belief, obviously, the Ribono Shel Olam runs the world, but also to understand that we need to step up and do things ourselves. And so I wish you the ability to think about this and the interest to think about this, and to try to conclude ourselves, each one of us, where the line gets drawn and which one is more powerful when in the unfolding of the journey of our own lives. There are times when we're more Somech on the Ribono Shel Olam. There are times when we feel that while we're Somech on the Ribono Shel Olam, we have to do something ourselves. And this is what my father taught me, and taught so many who merited to be in his orbit, and how we remember him all of these years later. It's, I think, 9 years coming up next year. I think next year is 10 years since he passed away. It's hard to believe. We think about him, our family thinks about him all the time. And Harav Tzvi ben Rav Pinchas Miriam, his soul should be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Thank you so much for joining me. And I wish all of you a good evening and a good Erev Yom Tov and a Chag Kosher v'Sameach.
Rabbi, can I say something to you? You know what I was thinking of? Story you once mentioned that you asked your mother, you were a small child.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
You asked your mother, you were a small child, where's daddy? And she responds in Yiddish, Elf in Yidden.
Yes, thank you. I asked my mother once to saw the one. I don't know why it's scraping.
We'll give it a little better. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining
Chag
me.
Kosher v'Sameach, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you so much. Great.
So
Thank you,
much,
Rabbi.
Rabbi. Chag Hashem.
Oh, that's Renee. Avi and Renee.
Thank you so much. Be well, all of you. Bye-bye.
Shkayach.
Thank you, Rabbi Schacter. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you. I get you. Get Yom Tov.
Renee. Wow. Oh my God, they look old.
Thank you. Thank you. Chag Kosher
Look at
v'Sameach.
him.
Thank you very much.
Avi Schreiber.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.